At my retirement party, my son slid me a note. 3 words changed everything. I stood in the center of the banquet hall, surrounded by colleagues who had become like family over 35 years at Morrison & Klein, a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Chicago. The room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the warm hum of celebration. My boss gave a touching speech about my dedication. My team presented me with a custom-engraved watch, and everyone seemed genuinely happy to honor this milestone in my life. I had spent decades pouring myself into spreadsheets, tax codes, and client meetings, building a reputation as someone reliable, thorough, and utterly committed. Tonight was supposed to be about closure, about stepping away from the fluorescent-lit cubicles and endless email chains to finally enjoy the freedom I had earned. But as I smiled and nodded through the congratulations, shaking hands and accepting hugs, I noticed my son Daniel standing near the back of the room. He was 28 years old, tall and quiet, with the same dark eyes as his late mother. He had always been reserved, the kind of person who observed more than he spoke, and tonight he seemed even more withdrawn than usual. While everyone else mingled and laughed, Daniel kept his distance, his expression unreadable. I felt a small pang of concern but pushed it aside, telling myself he was probably just tired from work or uncomfortable in such a crowded setting. Then, as the evening reached its peak and the cake was being rolled out, Daniel walked toward me through the crowd. He did not say anything at first, just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He pressed it into my hand without a word, his fingers trembling slightly, and then he turned and disappeared back into the throng of guests before I could ask him what it was. I assumed it was a heartfelt message, maybe something sentimental he felt too shy to say out loud. I tucked the note into my pocket, planning to read it later when I had a quiet moment alone. But curiosity got the better of me, and during a lull in the festivities, I excused myself to the restroom. I locked the door behind me, unfolded the paper, and read 3 simple words that made my heart stop. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my career, and my family suddenly felt like a carefully constructed lie. The celebration outside continued, oblivious. But for me, nothing would ever be the same. What had my son discovered that he needed to tell me this way, on this night of all nights? Why did those 3 words feel like the end of one chapter and the terrifying beginning of another? And how could something so brief carry the weight of a truth I had been blind to for so long? Leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from, and get ready, because what happened next will show you just how fragile the foundations of our lives can truly be. The note said, "Check your accounts," and those 3 words sent a cold wave of panic through my entire body. I stood there in the restroom, staring at the handwriting I recognized as Daniel's, trying to make sense of what he meant. Check your accounts? Which accounts? My retirement fund? My savings? The company pension I had just been celebrating? My hands shook as I refolded the paper and shoved it back into my pocket, my mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm down, but the anxiety only grew stronger. I had always been meticulous about my finances, reviewing every statement, tracking every deposit, ensuring that everything was in order for this exact moment when I would finally retire and live off what I had carefully saved. So what could Daniel possibly have found that would make him warn me like this, in secret, on the night I was supposed to be celebrating? I forced myself to return to the party, putting on a smile that felt like a mask, nodding at more congratulations and well wishes while my mind was miles away. I scanned the room for Daniel, but he had already left, slipping out without saying goodbye, and that only made my dread intensify. When the party finally ended and I drove home through the quiet streets of Chicago, the city lights blurring past my window, I felt like I was moving in slow motion, every second stretching out unbearably. The moment I walked into my house, I did not even bother turning on the lights. I went straight to my home office, a small room cluttered with filing cabinets and old tax documents, and powered on my computer. The screen glowed in the darkness as I logged into my bank account, my fingers fumbling over the keyboard. At first, everything looked normal. My checking account had the usual balance, my savings account seemed untouched, and I exhaled a shaky breath, thinking maybe Daniel had made a mistake or misunderstood something. But then I clicked on my retirement account, the one I had been contributing to for 35 years, the foundation of everything I had planned for my future. The page loaded slowly, the little spinning wheel mocking me, and when the numbers finally appeared, I felt the air leave my lungs. The balance was a fraction of what it should have been. Instead of the comfortable nest egg I had expected, there was barely enough to cover a few months of living expenses. I refreshed the page, certain it was an error, some glitch in the system, but the numbers stayed the same, cold and merciless. I clicked through the transaction history, scrolling back through months and then years, and that was when I saw them. Dozens of withdrawals, each one labeled as administrative fees or account adjustments, spread out over the past decade. They were small enough that I had never noticed them individually, buried among legitimate transactions, but together they added up to a devastating loss. Someone had been systematically draining my retirement fund, siphoning off my money little by little, and I had been completely oblivious. My chest tightened, and I gripped the edge of the desk, trying to breathe, trying to think. Who had access to my account? Who could have done this? And more importantly, how had Daniel discovered it before I did? I grabbed my phone and called him, my hand still shaking, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again, each unanswered ring amplifying my frustration and fear. I wanted answers. I needed to know what he had found and how, but he was not picking up, and I was left alone in the dark with this horrifying reality. I thought about calling the bank, demanding an explanation, threatening legal action, but it was late at night and nothing could be done until morning. So I sat there in my office, staring at the screen, replaying every decision I had made over the years, wondering how I could have been so blind. I had trusted the firm, trusted my colleagues, trusted the systems in place to protect me, and now it felt like that trust had been weaponized against me. The next morning, I woke up after barely sleeping, my mind still spinning with questions and anger. I called Morrison & Klein's main office as soon as they opened, asking to speak with someone in HR or finance, anyone who could help me understand what had happened to my account. The receptionist put me on hold, and I listened to the same generic elevator music I had heard 1,000 times before, except now it felt like a cruel joke. When someone finally picked up, a woman I vaguely recognized from the accounting department, she sounded confused when I explained the situation. She told me she would look into it and get back to me, but her tone was cautious, almost suspicious, as if she thought I was mistaken or exaggerating. I hung up feeling even more unsettled, realizing that this was not going to be resolved easily. Hours passed, and I heard nothing. I tried calling Daniel again, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly desperate, begging him to explain what he knew and where he had gotten his information. By late afternoon, my phone finally rang, but it was not Daniel. It was a lawyer from Morrison & Klein, a man I had never spoken to before, and his voice was formal, detached, almost cold. He informed me that the firm had reviewed my account and found no evidence of any unauthorized withdrawals. Everything, he said, had been processed according to the terms of my retirement plan, and if I had concerns, I was welcome to consult my original contract. I felt my blood run cold. This was not an explanation, it was a dismissal, a polite way of telling me to back off. I asked him to clarify what he meant by the terms of my contract, but he simply repeated that everything was in order and ended the call. I was left holding the phone, staring at it in disbelief, realizing that I was not just dealing with a mistake or a glitch. This was something deliberate, something calculated, and the firm was closing ranks, protecting itself. And somewhere in the middle of all this, my son had known, had tried to warn me, and now he was unreachable, leaving me to face this nightmare alone. What had Daniel uncovered? And why was Morrison & Klein so determined to shut me down? The truth was out there, buried beneath layers of corporate bureaucracy and carefully worded contracts, and I knew that finding it would mean risking everything I had left. I spent the rest of that day poring over every document I could find, pulling out old contracts, benefit statements, and emails I had saved over the years. The house fell silent around me except for the rustle of paper and the occasional frustrated sigh that escaped my lips. Every page seemed designed to confuse, filled with legal jargon and fine print that made my eyes blur. I had signed these documents decades ago, trusting that the firm had my best interests at heart, never imagining I would need to scrutinize them like. Late that night, Daniel finally called me back, and when I answered, his voice sounded strained, almost apologetic. He explained that a few weeks ago, he had been helping me organize some old files in the garage when he stumbled across a folder labeled retirement benefits that I had forgotten about. Out of curiosity, he had flipped through it, and something caught his attention. A clause buried deep in the fine print about discretionary management fees that could be applied to retirement accounts under certain conditions. He had compared those conditions to my recent account statements, which I had left lying on my desk, and realized that the fees being charged were far beyond what should have been allowed. Daniel told me he had tried to bring it up casually, but I had been so busy with work and the retirement preparations that I brushed him off, assuming he was overthinking things. So he decided to dig deeper on his own, reaching out to a friend who worked in financial auditing to get a second opinion. That friend confirmed what Daniel suspected. The fees were not just excessive, they were potentially fraudulent, designed to look legitimate but structured in a way that siphoned money without triggering any alarms. Daniel had wanted to tell me sooner, but he was afraid I would not believe him or that I would dismiss his concerns as paranoia. When he saw how happy I was at the retirement party, he could not bring himself to ruin the moment with a confrontation, so he wrote the note instead, hoping it would prompt me to investigate on my own. Now, hearing the desperation in my voice, he realized he should have been more direct. He apologized over and over, saying he should have insisted, should have made me listen, but I told him it was not his fault. If anything, I was grateful he had noticed what I had been too blind to see. We talked for over an hour that night, piecing together a plan. Daniel suggested I hire a lawyer, someone who specialized in financial fraud and employee benefits, because this was clearly beyond what I could handle on my own. He also recommended I start documenting everything, every email, every phone call, every piece of paper related to my retirement account, because if we were going to take on Morrison & Klein, we needed an airtight case. The next morning, I contacted a law firm that Daniel had researched, a small but reputable practice that had successfully represented clients in similar disputes. The lawyer I spoke with, a woman named Rebecca, listened carefully as I explained the situation. She asked pointed questions about the timeline, the amounts, and the specific clauses in my contract, and I could tell from her tone that she was taking this seriously. She agreed to take my case on contingency, meaning I would not have to pay unless we won, which was a relief given how little money I had left. Rebecca immediately filed a formal complaint with the State Labor Department and sent a demand letter to Morrison & Klein, requesting full disclosure of all transactions related to my retirement account. The firm responded within days, but their reply was cold and dismissive. They reiterated that everything had been done according to the contract I had signed and suggested that any further inquiries be directed to their legal team. Rebecca was not deterred. She filed a lawsuit, alleging breach of fiduciary duty and fraud, and requested access to the firm's internal records through discovery. The case moved slowly, as these things often do, but every new piece of evidence we uncovered painted a darker picture. It turned out that I was not the only one. Over the years, Morrison & Klein had implemented the same discretionary fee structure for dozens of employees, all of them nearing retirement, all of them too trusting or too busy to notice the slow drain on their accounts. The firm had been careful, spreading the withdrawals out over time, keeping them just below the threshold that would trigger automatic alerts, and burying the details in contracts so dense that even experienced accountants struggled to parse them. Rebecca argued that this was systematic exploitation, a calculated scheme to enrich the firm at the expense of its most loyal workers. The defense tried to claim that the fees were justified, that they covered administrative costs and investment management, but when Rebecca cross-examined their financial officers, the explanations fell apart. There were no detailed records of what these fees had been used for, no transparency, no accountability. It became clear that Morrison & Klein had been banking on the assumption that retirees would not fight back, that they would accept the loss and move on quietly. But I was not going to be quiet. The trial lasted 3 weeks, and every day I sat in that courtroom, listening to lawyers dissect my life and my career, I felt a mixture of anger and vindication. Colleagues I had worked with for decades testified on both sides, some supporting me, others defending the firm, and it was painful to see how divided we had become. But the evidence was undeniable. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning a verdict in my favor. Morrison & Klein was ordered to repay every cent they had taken from me and the other affected employees, plus damages for the emotional distress and financial hardship they had caused. The firm also faced penalties from the State Labor Department and was required to overhaul their retirement benefit programs under strict oversight. It was not a complete victory. Nothing could give me back the years I had lost or the trust one had placed in people who did not deserve it, but it was justice. Daniel was there in the courtroom when the verdict was read, and when it was over, he hugged me tightly, telling me he was proud of me for not giving up. I realized then that his note, those 3 simple words, had not just been a warning. They had been a lifeline, a nudge that pushed me to question everything I thought I knew and to fight for what was rightfully mine. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life slowly. The money I recovered allowed me to retire with dignity, though the experience left scars that would never fully heal. I became an advocate for financial transparency, speaking at seminars and writing articles about the dangers of trusting blindly, even when it comes to institutions that seem trustworthy. And every time I shared my story, I thought about that night at my retirement party, the moment Daniel slipped that note into my hand, and how close I had come to letting the truth slip away unnoticed. Sometimes the most important messages come in the quietest ways, and sometimes the people who love us see things we cannot see ourselves. I also learned that standing up for yourself, even when the odds seem insurmountable, is worth every ounce of effort, because the alternative, accepting injustice and moving on, would have haunted me for the rest of my days.